Today, we're going to break down a process that might look like a slow-motion crash from the outside, but it's not. It's actually a predictable, almost mechanical failure, the corporate debt spiral. Let's get into how it works.
This quote right here, it just nails the whole idea. See, we're not talking about a string of bad luck or some sudden, unpredictable crisis. We're talking about a feedback loop where the very act of trying to survive is what speeds up a company's end. The math is just relentless, and as you're about to see, the clock is always ticking.
So where does a spiral like this even begin? Well, it all starts with a huge shift in why a company borrows money. A healthy company, they borrow to invest, to build, to grow. A company that's stepping into the spiral, it's borrowing just to stay alive.
And this is the absolute crucial point, what we call loss-funded survival. It's that moment when a company's own engine, its actual operations, can't power the machine anymore. It's basically on an external life support system of credit, not to create anything new, but just to cover the cash it's burning every single day and pay the interest on its old debt.
Okay, this simple formula really shows you the mechanics of the trap. A company's future debt is just its current debt plus the interest it owes minus whatever cash it brings in. Now, if that cash flow is negative, or if it's just not enough to cover the interest, well, the total debt has to go up. And that means the next interest payment is even bigger, which means it needs to borrow even more just to stand still. It's a perfect, vicious circle.
So how can we actually track this decline? How do we know when a company is getting dangerously close to the point of no return? Turns out, there's one key metric that acts kind of like a financial EKG, showing us the health of the company's heart.
And this is it, the interest coverage ratio, or ICR. It asks a brutally simple question. How many times can your operating profit cover your interest payments? This has nothing to do with hopes or fancy projections. It's about the cold, hard cash the business generates versus the cost of its debt. This ratio, it's probably the single most important vital sign for solvency.
So let's look at the numbers. When things are good, a company's ICR is way up there, over 4. This means for every single dollar it owes in interest, it's making more than $4 in profit from its operations. That's a huge cushion. It means it can easily handle a surprise, like a market downturn, or if interest rates suddenly go up.
But, as things get worse, that ratio starts to drop. And when the ICR falls below 2.0, that's when the alarm bells really start to go off. That safety margin has shrunk a lot. A big chunk of the company's debt is now considered at risk because even a tiny dip in earnings could be enough to push it over the edge.
And here it is, the breaking point, an ICR below 1. This means the company's operating profit isn't even enough to cover its interest payments anymore. It is, for all intents and purposes, insolvent. The only reason it's still around is because someone is lending it new money just to pay the interest on its old money. This is the very definition of a zombie firm.
Okay, but wait. If a company is basically insolvent, how does it keep the lights on? Why doesn't the whole thing just collapse right then and there? The answer lies in a practice that just delays the inevitable. It doesn't solve a thing.
And that practice is called forbearance. It's basically when a lender decides to look the other way for a bit. They grant some temporary breaks to a borrower who can't pay. Now, why on earth would they do that? Here's the key. It lets the bank avoid taking a huge loss on its own books right away. It's a choice to delay the pain.
And this shows you the huge difference between just kicking the can down the road and actually fixing the road. Forbearance? It just delays the payment and hides the problem under the rug. Restructuring, on the other hand, is painful. It forces everybody to admit there's a loss and to fix the real operational problems to try and create a business that can actually survive long term. This all leads to this really destructive cycle that we call evergreening. It starts with the bank being terrified of taking a big loss. So to avoid that, it puts off dealing with the bad loan. Then it does something that sounds totally crazy. It lends more money to the failing company, often just enough for it to make the interest payments on the old debt. This keeps the loan looking healthy on the bank's books, even while the company is sinking deeper and deeper.
Now, so far, this all sounds really mechanical, right? Like a machine breaking down. But you have to remember, human behavior and psychology are what keep the gears of this machine turning. Which brings us to a really important question. Why? Why do supposedly rational people, both the lenders and the borrowers, keep going down this path when the destination is so obviously a cliff? Well, the answer is all about the incentives at play.
There are really 4 powerful forces keeping this thing going. First, for the lender, it's just denial. taking a huge loss hurts their own numbers, so they play a game of extend and pretend. Second, for the borrower, it's all about short-term survival. They're just focused on making it through the next payroll, the next quarter, and they ignore the long-term reality. Third, the system itself can sometimes encourage this, especially if the rules for bankruptcy are weak. And finally, sometimes lenders keep a company on life support just to protect the value of the massive loans they've already made.
So once these behaviors lock the spiral in place, the final stages unfold with this grim mathematical predictability. There's a very clear architecture to the final collapse.
Let's just walk through this final 6-phase sequence. It all starts with a liquidity breach, where the company dips into its credit line for the first time to handle a shock. Then in phase 2, the operating deficit, the losses keep piling up and that credit is now being used to fund payroll and suppliers. That's when the ICR drops below 2.0. Next up is technical default, where the company breaks the rules of its loan, which gives the bank control. Phase 4 is evergreening, which we just talked about. The bank waives the problem and lends more money. Then phase 5, the non-linear step. This is where things accelerate. Maybe interest rates spike or a huge payment is due, and the debt load just explodes. And finally, we hit terminal failure. The credit line is totally maxed out, the bank finally cuts its losses, and the collapse is sudden and it is total. And that brings us to the final and really stark takeaway from all of this. This whole slide into insolvency. It's not a story of bad luck or bad timing. Once a company starts borrowing money to fund its losses, its fate is no longer a matter of opinion, it's a matter of arithmetic.